All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Hannah from the Clean Water Education Partnership here with Amin Davis today. I'm the Education Outreach Coordinator, and this is our third interview in our Water Leaders series. So, Amin, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Okay, great. Thanks, Hannah. Well, my name is Amin Davis. I work with North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality in the Division of Water Resources, and I manage half of a grant program called the Water Resource Development Grant Program. I also am a board member and very active with Partners for Environmental Justice, a nonprofit organization located in Southeast Raleigh.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And yeah, if you were tuning in to our previous sessions, we did interview Tots Height, who is the program director for PEJ. So that's a nice connection there. Well, thanks so much for being with us today. Amin, I'm really excited to interview you and have a conversation with you and learn more about your work with NCDEQ and yeah, everything that you do. So my first question for you is, why did you decide to work in the water sector? What drew you to this this sort of place of work, and how did you get here?
Okay. Well, the simple answer is that, I think I was born with a love of natural water resources such as streams, rivers, ponds, lakes, wetlands. As a little kid, I spent lots of time exploring those areas. For the Water Resources Research Institute annual conference a couple years ago, they had a organization called the Nile Project visit this area. They're based in Africa, but they do their connection is based on the Nile River in Africa, and they came and we had a session actually at the Walnut Creek Wetland Center. It was called Creek Connections, and a bunch of us got to talk about what was the origin of our love for water. And my creek connection essentially was made behind my neighbor's house as a little boy growing up, about 15 minutes from northeast of downtown New Haven, Connecticut. And that's kind of where my creek connection was made. And that's why I do what I do, because I just love water resources.
I love that personal connection that you shared. I also have an affinity for water because of childhood experiences. I grew up in visiting the lakes and rivers of the Midwest, and so I definitely have many fond memories of canoeing on lakes and rivers with my dad and exploring the wetland by our house, catching frogs. So I totally relate to that. Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so my second question for you is, who or what inspires you and gives you hope to continue your work?
Yeah, there's several things. I kind of tried to boil it down to three primary inspirations. First one is really the visionary leadership of Dr. Norman Camp, who is a longtime and late chairman of Partners for Environmental Justice. And Ross Andrews, he was a good friend of mine. He was also a longtime PEJ board member, and he was the first director of the Walnut Creek Wetland Park. But their vision for putting an urban, what Dr. Camp called a urban destination park in Rochester Heights community, was that vision came well before the construction of the Wetland Center, which was renamed in he and his wife's honor a couple years ago, which was great. But just their longtime advocacy for trying to improve conditions in Rochester Heights area, and also with Ross, he created a nonprofit called the Center for Human Earth Restoration, which has been recently taken over or managed through the City of Raleigh Parks Department. But the primary goal of that was to expose underserved youth in Raleigh and other places to basically just give them opportunities for environmental education and experiential learning, going on field trips, whether it be in the wetland park or whether it be to state parks. And, I think of both of them, they're no longer with us, but with my work with PEJ, and since they kind of laid the groundwork for the things that PEJ was able to do, including the biggest thing was the design and construction of the Wetland Center. I think of them from time to time in the work that I do. I would say the second are the more recently the creators of the Atlanta Watershed Learning Network. Keisha and I actually got to go down to their graduation ceremony in Atlanta back in, I think it was fall 2019, and we were really inspired by the the creators of this incredible outreach program, and then the graduates of the program, and in the things that they were doing, how they were inspired to really make a difference in their communities. And that's what inspired PEJ to try and bring that here in creating the Raleigh Watershed Learning Network, which I'll talk about next. So that was an incredible inspiration personally. And then I also have some colleagues and coworkers that there are many others, but the ones that really stand out to mind, Cam McNutt is a colleague of mine. He's with the Division of Water Resources. Christy Perrin is with the Water Resources Research Institute, and she and another professor named Dr. Louis Rivers created the Walnut Creek Wetland Community Partnership back in 2014 that is helping to kind of continue the community advocacy for that area adjacent to the wetland park. And then Mitch Woodward, who goes around the state, he works for North Carolina Cooperative Extension and does workshops on rain gardens and all things kind of green infrastructure and water resource improvement related. And their work has local, statewide, and definitely with Cam, his work has national impact with EPA and other organizations. So there are many other things that inspire me, but those are kind of the three primary ones that I thought about.
Yeah, I love all the people connections that you mentioned. I think for me, like definitely people are what inspire me to continue doing my work too. And being a part of the both the Watershed Learning Network and the Watershed Academy in Durham have been like highlights of my COVID education that I've done. And yeah, it's been so inspirational to see the projects that people are working on and how both of those programs are going to continue to grow in both Raleigh and Durham. And yeah, I always find myself mentioning that in calls and when I network with other people about a really cool thing that's happening in this area. So I really appreciate all the work that I know you and so many others have done to bring that here from the Atlanta model. And yeah, I didn't know that it was based off of the Atlanta Watershed Learning Network until I had talked with you a couple months ago. And I've been so inspired by their website and the stories that they share. And so I'm so glad you and Keisha were able to go to that graduation ceremony. That sounds like it was really transformational and inspirational. So
yeah, no, it was, no doubt. And thank you for your participation with the Raleigh Watershed Learning Network as well.
Yeah, just a small piece of what you all are doing. It's really the participants who are so who are really going to be the change makers in the community, which is really amazing to see.
Yeah.
Okay, so my next question for you is, what is an exciting project or initiative that you're working on?
Well, I just kind of continue on the theme of watershed learning networks, because we just wrapped up the first Raleigh Watershed Learning Network, I think 2 weeks ago. And, for your listeners, it's a 6-week outreach and engagement program that provided participants with an overview of important water topics such as stormwater management, green infrastructure, the impacts of climate change on water resources, and also environmental justice, which is intricately woven into water resources. The like you mentioned earlier, the projects, the last session or module we had, the graduates talked about the projects that they were going to do or had done. And that was the part that really inspired me. And I was just really lit after hearing and seeing the things that the graduates had done. Probably the thing that stands out most was one of the participants actually created her own rain barrel that she's going to put at her house. They're rain barrels can be made available, and you can buy them for $50 to $150, something like that. But she took it upon herself to purchase the equipment. She got the barrel, I think, from Mount Olive Pickle Company, and basically is working on creating, her own rain barrels for her house. There were other participants that another participant created a fact sheet about a grass drainage swale in her community that she gave to her homeowners association and is wanting to speak to them about the maintenance of it. And and there were so many other projects that we heard that morning, but that's the part that is most meaningful, to see the participants and the graduates taking what they learned and doing something with it. And hopefully a vision I have is hopefully they will continue to do things like that, engage their neighbors, their friends, their family, their community in the importance of these things that may seem minor, but looking at it from a larger perspective are very meaningful things to really help improve water resource conditions in at their homes, in their neighborhoods, and in their communities.
Yeah, I work with youth doing action projects. I've done that for the last couple of years, and so I totally resonate with what you're saying about how that is like such an inspirational piece, and you can really see the results of your hard work and education in kind of instilling hope and action in others in programs like this, which is so cool. I also see the participants that you had in this first cohort helping with future cohorts too, and becoming inspiration for future action projects, and maybe that's a continuation in future programs. They continue to work on existing projects, and so I think it's really going to be such a fruitful, growing, prosperous, really cool activity that you continue to do. And I'm so excited to continue following it and hopefully, participate in small ways and continue amplifying, because I think it's a really amazing work that you're all doing.
Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, that's our vision, and we hope that continues, most definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so my next question for you is kind of shifting more into thinking about your sector more broadly. So what trends and challenges are you currently dealing with and or are on the horizon for your sector?
Yeah, the biggest one is really climate change, or whatever you want to label what's going on. But the more frequent and intense rain events and other storms that are going on across the state, because with my job, I travel across the state. Our grant program provides funding for local governments and communities to implement green infrastructure projects and water-based recreation projects. And I hear it. I've been surprised how much in Western North Carolina they talk about the frequent and intense rain events, and you can see it based on the condition of the streams that have banks that are collapsing and eroding. And the landowners are talking about how I asked them, when did this start? And they're like, over 90% of the time it's, well, within the last 4 years, one of the storms we had recently. So obviously the more intense and frequent rain events lead to more stormwater runoff, which leads to more degradation of the human environment and also our water resources. So the other emerging challenge or trend, particularly with my agency, are emerging contaminants. I think the issues at the Comores facility in Cumberland County along the Cape Fear River have shed a lot of light on the fact that there are all these different industrial chemicals that are produced, and we don't really have a good handle on the human and environmental impacts that these contaminants are having, particularly, and a lot of them are getting into our water resources and are being, more recently just being discovered. And so it's going to take a huge amount of time and resources to, number one, assess the scope of the problem, and then to come up with acceptable standards and limits for humans and the environment. So I would say definitely, the climate change and then the emerging contaminants are two huge issues that are not just local issues, they're regional issues, they're national issues, and in some ways international issues as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's great to talk to you after interviewing two folks who work with like really local organizations, because you have the local connection with PEJ, and then you have this more statewide connection with your position at the state. And so I think like you really have a good handle on the like scope and scale of some of these issues and how they impact directly communities, but how they're also broader issues that are like society is facing, which I really appreciate in your perspective on your work.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I agree with your challenges that you mentioned. I think those are things that come up for me when I'm doing education and outreach, to talking with folks about local contaminants, and also thinking about more frequent flooding events and rain events and how those impact low-lying areas, whether they live in a floodplain, those kinds of things. So I definitely like hear stories from and personal accounts all the time when I'm out in the community.
Yeah. And I'll just make one connection to kind of the environmental justice aspects of this and the social justice aspects. And that's that, both with the more frequent and intense rain events, as well as the emergent contaminants, the communities of color and marginalized communities are the ones that are generally most affected by these issues. So I won't steal the thunder of your next question, but I hope that greater awareness of these things will kind of help to create more, not just awareness, but changes in policies, perspectives, and regulations to help address the inequities that, communities of color and underserved communities face more than the general public.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that there are communities that are feeling those impacts more, and that addressing those inequities at the policy level and also just at the education and community engagement level, I think is really important.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so my next question is, what are your hopes for the future of your sector? Where do you hope that this will take you in the future?
Well, I think that my hopes are that there would be a wider understanding by, just society in general about how watersheds are water communities. I think until we get to that perspective, we're really not going to be able to make the really significant changes that need to be made to protect both the human environment and the natural environment and our water resources. And we talked about that during the Raleigh Watershed Learning Network, and it's just something that I have become so passionate about, because it needs to be looked at that scale and not just like, hey, this is just going on at this particular location, but how what happens at one particular location affects the bigger picture. And from a water resources perspective, if things are not looked at a watershed, from a watershed or sub-watershed perspective, then it's not you're missing the bigger picture will be missed. And so that's definitely one thing. I'd also say just a broader adoption of green infrastructure practices by communities and local governments. Um, Ideally, that, my personal feeling based on what I know is that um, low impact development principles that include green infrastructure and green infrastructure, both the protection of natural green infrastructure, such as stream buffers and forested wetlands, things of those nature that provide, our society with so many benefits and provide our communities with so many benefits. The natural green infrastructure places should be protected and preserved through development. And
Mhm.
then in areas where there's redevelopment, like in suburban or urban areas, requiring the retrofitting of green stormwater infrastructure into these places, things like
Mhm.
bioretention areas, rain gardens, even water harvesting, things that will help to reduce the volume of stormwater that reaches our streams and water resources. So I would say, my hopes are that these two, both a greater understanding of watersheds being water communities and broader adoption and hopefully requirement of low impact development principles and green infrastructure into all development, unless for some reason it's not feasible.
Mm.
That's really my hope.
Yeah, I am always amazed by how many people I talk with when I do education that don't know what watershed they live in, and don't understand how their actions are impacting the water resources in their community. Um, and I think, at least from my perspective and in talking with the public, people understand those connections if they've been personally impacted by them or they know they've been personally impacted by them. But when they don't think about them or don't have to think about them, it's a lot easier to ignore. And yeah, so one of my goals in my education, is kind of similar to what you were saying, is to always like educate people about what watershed they live in, not only their community's watershed, but who is upstream and downstream of them. And putting that into perspective, I think, is really important. And especially if they live in an urban area, like thinking about how quantity and quality are really important factors in their water quality, because of, more impervious surfaces and that need for more green stormwater infrastructure. So yeah, I think it's in one of the ways I like to inspire youth in particular is by giving them local examples of where green infrastructure is already happening in their community and how can they use that as inspiration. So yeah, I love that you made those two connections because those are two things that I think about and talk about a lot too.
Yeah, and can I just add one thing to what about green infrastructure is, I've recently, in the last couple of years, have come to understand better the not just the environmental benefits that green infrastructure provides our communities, but the economic benefits that they provide our
Mhm.
communities, with helping to kind of reduce nuisance flooding.
Mhm.
They can, increase property values. They can help to reduce just the maintenance cost of the impacts of nuisance flooding. And also the social and public health benefits of green
Yeah.
infrastructure. How and with the coronavirus pandemic, I think that's definitely has brought to light the importance of green spaces, parks, and greenways, and things like that. And it does, it for mental health purposes, just being out in a green space on a beautiful day like today can do wonders for people. And you're around trees that are pumping and plants and shrubs that are pumping out oxygen into the into the atmosphere instead of carbon dioxide and all of that. So it helps with helping to moderate local climate conditions as well. So if there were a silver bullet or a green pill for a lot of the issues that we're dealing with, to me, green infrastructure and green stormwater infrastructure are it. They're not the only thing, but I can't think of anything better to kind of, in terms of holistically improving not just our water resources, but our communities as well.
Yeah, there's so many co-benefits. I'm glad that you brought in the other aspects of sustainability that are definitely tied to green infrastructure. I think a lot about how it helps with extreme heat and cooling places with shade and being able to absorb more heat. And that, to me, as somebody who's not from the South, who moved here, is like, I would love to see it not get hotter, or find ways that we can adapt to the heat, because I definitely personally have a hard time with that. And I know it's just gonna, it's gonna continue to impact people, especially in the summers with warming nights and things like that. So
Definitely.
okay, so we have approached the final question. As we kind of wrap up here, I'm just wondering if you have any advice that you would give people listening who might not have thought about working in the sector before. What advice can you impart on or inspire them to join this work?
Sure. Well, this really relates to what we were just talking about with regards to the community benefits of green infrastructure. But we all, no matter what political affiliation or even just level of education or knowledge about these issues, I'm sure we can all agree that clean water and clean air are essential requirements for life here on Earth. So I think, if folks can learn more about the community benefits of green infrastructure, and then hopefully be inspired to help implement green infrastructure projects in their communities, whether it be at their house or whether it be kind of at a watershed level or larger scale, realizing that those things can help improve the quality of both our water and air resources, and in turn, the quality of our lives. So that would be kind of my advice to anybody, whether even whether they're looking at working in the water sector or just the general public, because this affects all of us. But definitely the water sector professionals can really help with the engagement and outreach and communication about the importance of clean air and clean water. And like I said earlier, green infrastructure is a way to kind of help ensure and protect our water and air quality.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a great way to end our session today. Do you have any final thoughts or words you want to share before we conclude?
No, I just want to thank you, Hannah, and the Clean Water Education Partnership and TJ for doing this series. I appreciate your work. You're helping to get the word and message out about these really important topics. So I'm just grateful for the opportunity to have been able to have this discussion with you.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to chat with you too, and I appreciate all of your insights and wisdom that you shared today. Thank you.